Hey, everybody. So, welcome to the first edition of Time on the Terrain. So, just very quickly, what's this all about? Why am I doing it? And if you're watching it, what can you expect to get out of it? So, what it is I listened to this interesting interview between Shane Parrish and former military advisor. Shane Parrish, if you haven't come across him, check him out. Head Farnham Street, really prominent thought leader around decision making primarily, and various other things, but a really, really smart guy, a guy I suggest you check out. Um, and one of the features of this conversation was around the difference between the map and the terrain. And I immediately latched onto this phrase because it's an expression I'm very familiar with. My father was a military man, and he used to talk about this a lot. And in the military, particularly, they talk about it in terms of the perspectives of leadership between the upper echelons, the brigadiers, the generals, and other such, senior equivalents, with the captains and the lieutenants, and then the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and the master sergeants, and so on, who are on the terrain. And I think in the corporate or organizational sense, we can look at this in terms of the perspective of the board and the C-suite, as opposed to the business unit leaders or those who are engaged in some way, shape, or form with the market, whether you're in a customer-facing role or a supplier-orientated role. And I think that there is an opportunity to be had in specifically talking about what is happening right now, kind of sense checking what do we see when we're actually out in the real world in our marketplaces versus what do we think is happening based on observations, data, dashboards, numbers, figures, etc. So that's the main sort of stimulus for having this weekly dialogue around what I'm seeing going on in the terrain. The second reason to do it is essentially this is a role that I've come to realize I have been fulfilling for various people in my network, primarily clients, but also leaders that I just interact with in a general business sense, who have increasingly, especially during the COVID pandemic, been reaching out to me essentially saying, "Hey, Tim, you're a guy who's well connected. You know what's going on, no doubt, by gathering and collating the perspectives of all the leaders that you work with. Could you give us some insights? Would you mind sharing with us what you see?" And essentially, if I'm doing that for them, I'm very happy to do that for you as well. So that's what this is going to be. Right now, my terrain is this home office, this space that I do spend a reasonable amount of my time. It's now July 2020. The last few years, I've spent 2, 3, 4 days on the road in various parts of Australia and the world. So as this moves forward, and if I can maintain this as a weekly rhythm, you may see me in different locations and on different terrains. There we go. So essentially, enough about that. What will you get out of this? So look, I hope that if you're somebody who engages with this content regularly, you can use this yourself as a bit of a range finding mechanism, that through the perspectives that I'm sharing, and obviously one of those being my own, you yourself can get an additional view on the terrain as it is being seen. And perhaps as the audience builds and the interaction grows, there may actually be observations and offerings of perspectives around specific terrains that the audience are experiencing that they may share as we move forward with this. And certainly if there's a demand for it, I can set up an email or some kind of forum where people can put their posts and their recommendations, as well as discuss and interact with a bit of a community if we get to that point. So I hope you'll get perspective. I also hope you will get interaction. And if you want to interact with me, please do. Leave a comment, send me an email, drop me a note in YouTube, on LinkedIn, in Facebook, Insta, wherever, Twitter you want. We're there. And you can ask me a question, ask me what I'm seeing, give me some feedback, disagree with me if you see something different. I would love to hear all of that. Okay. So basically, don't be shy, get in touch. And over the course of time, if you're tuning in to these as a series, I would hope that what you'll then receive, will be, a sort of an introspective almost, comparing. Okay, well, that was what Tim and Tim's clients were seeing then, that was what I was seeing back then. Oh, what's changed? What's different? And then there may actually be a bit of a learning journey that we can go on together as this moves forward. And maybe by the time we're 3, 6, 12 months into it, we might start reflecting back on what was the terrain then and what's the terrain then now, as it will be. So that's the kind of the introductory monologue-y bit. So here we stand. It's July 2020. I'm in Australia, and I've had some interactions in preparation for today with some relationships in the US and in the UK. All right. And I'm going to aim to provide as diverse a range of perspectives and sort of terrain samples as I can from those different modes. So for me personally, it's been a a kind of a tricky navigation through the terrain over the last couple of 3 weeks. There's been a lot of shifts, there's been a lot of changes, there's been a lot of variables in the equation. So in Australia right now, we got to a point where the view essentially was that we'd flattened the COVID curve. We could start to emerge from any, sort of really significant period of restriction. And essentially, certainly the view from government was, let's get on with it. Let's get the economy moving. Away we go. And that positivity, was stimulated. There definitely was a lot more commentary and interactions that I was having, sort of with the clients that we serve at 4i. People were starting to talk about doing stuff again. We then had one of our states, Victoria, basically have an absolute runaway of increase in COVID cases, which led to the state government locking the main city, which is Australia's second largest economic hub, Melbourne, locking Melbourne down again. And right now, today, they've reported the highest number of COVID cases so far in the pandemic in Australia, in a single state, in a single day. And they're very seriously considering going to the full serious stage 4 proper do not leave your home lockdown. So what that's done and what I've seen in the terrain is that has really vacuumed up a lot of confidence and sucked that confidence back out of the market. And I've now had conversations with CEOs of major corporates and EGMs of global corporates that are running the businesses here, essentially saying, well, we really now don't know how our market is going to perform and how much of a shock to the system this secondary wave, this additional lockdown is going to be. And one in particular, which is the Australian headquarters of a global corporate, they essentially said that they just did their standard quarterly investor update and they're not giving a fiscal prediction. And they've said categorically they're not going to give a fiscal prediction for the next quarter either. They're essentially saying, we don't know what kind of dividend we're going to be able to return. We don't know what our results are going to be. And that uncertainty, that is, I think, the one thing that I would point to and say, that's what I see in the terrain right now. Even clients of ours who are essential services for whom essentially COVID has not stopped their business, if anything, it's grown it, they also have this uncertainty. I was having a conversation earlier today where the uncertainty was around supply chain and that there is a really extended delay now in air and sea freight to get what become the fundamental building blocks of providing a service, whether that's a product or a commodity or just some essential part of how you create value. You can't get it on the same time frame that you're used to. So obviously that has a cascading effect down into the front end of your business and puts pressure on the sales guys and the customer relationships and so forth. So uncertainty, how does that compare here? And what do I see in the Australian terrain compared to the US or the UK? And it is curious that there is quite a significant contrast with both of those domains. So let's start overseas in the States. Now, we pay a lot of attention to America. Australia is and always has been a major trading partner of the US rather than with. There's not an equivalence for sure. So that's one reason we pay a lot of attention. Secondly, we have a business in America. Okay, so one of our key leaders of our team at 4i, Tom Allen Leavenworth, is in LA. And we had a big strategic intent to build that business up significantly this year and moving forward, which obviously we're kind of holding back on for the time being. We're still there, we're still doing work, but we're not going to push quite as hard as we thought we would. So Tom's kind of out of the market at the moment. He's had a personal bereavement to deal with. But a conversation I had this week with so a supplier of ours, and they were effectively saying it's a disaster area right now commercially in America. And as much as if you're in the States, your view may be different, it may be even more cataclysmic than that term, disaster, or it may be more positive. But this view certainly was that the only part of this person's business which is in any way reliable is the part that services state government and state government agencies. Pretty much everything else, where they do similar work to that which we do, focusing on people, focusing on discretionary spend and in developing and so on and so on. Basically, all bets are off. Nobody right now is investing in that. And in this person's view, that's not going to change anytime soon. Most probably not this year. And then the UK, very different. And I haven't had direct contact with anyone in Europe, but I would suggest and assume that this might be similar. So the UK and Europe have had very large, extended periods of time of full total lockdown. What they've also had is extremely significant, particularly for small business, stimulus packages. Okay, in the UK, people's salaries were basically paid by the government up to 80%. Not everyone, but the vast majority of salaries were paid, the vast majority of, and people were told to stay at home and they'd still get paid. They've also then had a series of either grants or loans handed out to businesses of all sizes and walks of life. And in particular, the reference that I have is another supplier of ours, who's received really a substantial injection of cash in the form of a very long tenured government loan that they've reinvested in significantly improving the capability of one of their main products, a software product, as well as some more marketing and some more collateral for folk like us who are the distributors of said software. So that is a big help. And seemingly what's happened and the sort of the immediate return that the government was hoping for from that stimulus is that as the lockdowns have ceased, as people have sort of emerged from these sort of quiet times of not really sort of transacting and being engaged in much commercial relations, they are coming back much more confidently and essentially saying, right, we've got money to spend, essentially because we've been given it for the most part. And that's what we're going to do. So this supplier of ours has seen this massive demand uptick very, very quickly, which certainly around the traps in Australia, we haven't seen. And with the exception of really very, very few conversations that I've had, nobody here is expecting a runaway demand train. They're expecting very slow, very conservative, very risk averse, step by step economic activity, which is going to take a long, long time to get back to anything like the levels that we were experiencing earlier in the year. So just to try and summarize all of that, what have I learned from the time on the terrain that I've spent in this last week? Uncertainty rules. It is definitely worse in the US than it is in Australia. It is definitely better in the UK than it is in Australia. And in all of those markets, it's patchy. There are certain corners of the economy that are still powering along, either because they're state or federally funded or because they're servicing stuff that is state or federally funded. But even in those environments, there's a real aversion to any kind of risk. And if you've got an investment opportunity in front of you, you're likely to go with something familiar, something that seems like it's going to have a guaranteed return, or you're just going to hold back on making that investment. And if you need to report results, you're going to be extremely cautious in how you do that. So I hope this, where are we? 14 and a bit minute dialogue will have been of interest, will have sort of stimulated some thought. I'd love to see some comments and some commentary. And I will return next week for some more time on the terrain. Thanks.